My name is Chase Heatherly. My day job, I serve as the publisher of the Free Times and the Post and Courier's Columbia edition. And then my other hat I wear is I serve as the president of the Contemporaries board for the Columbia Museum of Art. The Contemporaries really are with the mission of getting people in their 20s and 30s and 40s to come into the museum. I think having younger professionals involved in a cultural arts organization like this is so important because we think differently. It takes more unique experiences to bring us into somewhere like this museum. The Contemporaries, of course, hold programs and events throughout the year. The proceeds from all of those programs and events go to our art acquisition fund, which is then used to acquire art for the museum. So there are, I believe, 6 to 8 pieces that we have acquired from the museum over the whole course of the Contemporaries history. The most notable one, of course, is the Chihuly. As you walk into the art museum, it has become very symbolic of the Museum of Art, and we were excited to be a part of that. I always say that sitting here, the upstairs of the atrium where we are now, you see Rosen, you see Mandel, you see the Chihuly, you sit in this one space and you say, wow, the Contemporaries have been such an integral part of the art museum for the last several decades.
Welcome to Binder. I'm Ray McManus.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here. The CMA is a museum with a collection. And because of that, one question is inevitable. Who's picking what is getting collected? The truth is there's a lot to it. Some works are donated, sometimes they're purchased, but regardless of how objects end up here, there are choices that must be made along the way. A museum's vault is not the Library of Babel. There is not an infinite amount of space to store every object humankind has ever created. So naturally, a museum must define the objects they will collect. But those objects are more than just the things we cover under glass and display. Those objects create a culture. They serve as the start of conversations and ideas, and the choices a museum makes on what they collect and show have a direct impact on that. But the question still remains. Who is picking what's getting collected? Well, Ray is determined to find out. So I wrangled him up a few guests for today's program that can hopefully give him some insight. Up first, we're going to hear from 2 more CMA affinity groups who've recently been able to have a hand in this process directly. Hope you enjoy.
Well, I'm here with Adrienne Montare. Adrienne, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. So I am an architect. I'm originally from New York. And at some point, as we were raising our children in Brooklyn, we started thinking about other places we would want to raise our kids and be professionals. So one thing led to another, and my husband, his parents were here in Columbia, and some major things were happening in Columbia that drew us here. In particular, and probably the most important thing, was when the art museum moved from on campus to this former Macy's, where it is now on Main Street. And I was like, oh, Main Street is so cool. And, you know, Tom, my husband, who grew up here in the 70s, thought I was absolutely ridiculous to think Columbia was cool. But I was like, no, that's cool. So we founded it in 1997, shortly after my husband and I and our 2 girls moved to Columbia.
The group you're referring to, of course, is the Columbia Design League.
Right. And we based it on the Architectural League of New York. We had been involved in that. And the Architectural League really got architects kind of activated and engaged, working with the city on policy and planning issues. So it was more than just going to lectures and seeing beautiful work all the time. It was actually being very involved in the city. And when we were, making our plans to move to Columbia, we were thinking, we know a couple of architects there. We have friends there, and we know these great designers. But we felt like there wasn't a cohesive community. So the idea for the Design League was kind of 2-pronged. It was, one, a really fun kind of social thing for us so we could hang out with all these cool people, but also so that we could have an impact. One of the biggest things for us was, and this is going back quite a few years ago, the city was looking at an overall master plan for the city and how to make connections between our neighborhoods, which have these like 4-lane highways cutting through town, all this surface parking, just like a nowhere land. And so the city came to us. We had been here at the museum, we were doing our lectures, and the city came to us and asked us to participate. And so we actually hosted several input sessions and kind of brought that design perspective to that planning process for the city. And so I think that's one of our probably biggest successes.
Well, I think anybody who's been in the city in the last decade has to see the influence.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have areas to work on, sure, depending on where you are in the city, but you can definitely see there has been a revitalization that has taken place.
Absolutely.
And to the point now that people want to live in Columbia.
Exactly.
And as one who grew up on the other side of the river, if you were coming in Jarvis Clapman and you start to begin, to see the skyline because you're down the hill and you're about to go up the hill, even as a kid, it was always something that would just kind of wow me, That is such a very important facet to our place, that
Absolutely.
I think we see, but we just kind of take for granted.
Yeah.
Like, it was just always like that, or it just happened,
That's right.
But it takes planning and it takes, a special attention to design.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that the Columbia Design League has done here at the museum?
So a lot of it is just trying to increase that awareness. At its most basic, it's a lecture series.
Tonight, I want to talk about tactical urbanism. So it's a wonky term, but I want to know how many of you are familiar with this idea.
We try and have 3, 4, 5 lectures where we bring designers either local or from all over the country.
Anybody who talks or writes about toilets is, of course, being autobiographical, no matter how much they try to shield that fact. And of course, for most people who come to a lecture about toilets, it is out of their personal interest, at least in part, as opposed to their social conscience.
Just showing the public, here are the designers in town, here are the designers across the country. Here's a topic that we're going to look at. We're going to look at, public restrooms. Why are there no public restrooms available in most cities in the United States? We even had tattoo artists come in, and there was all this discussion about how tattoo is design and the tattoos that go on, prosthetics and how it, just elevates the experience of the person who has to have this prosthetic for the rest of their life by having it tattooed. But we also do kind of more civic engagement projects, play with your city. That's where we come up with a problem that we have in Columbia, and then we bring in a panel and we do a competition, and then we have an unveiling here at the museum of the solutions for this problem.
Let's talk specifically about a particular acquisition that we have here at the museum, the Transat Chair.
Yeah, very exciting.
Which, depending on your perspective, some people might look at it and think, oh, God, that would be the most relaxing chair in the world to sit in. And some people think, oh, God, that would be torture. Really, I think it's not so much in sitting in it, it would be trying to get back out of it.
Right.
But talk a little bit about that chair, sort of the history behind it and how that was acquired.
Yeah. The chair is by the designer and architect Eileen Gray. She was born in Ireland, in the 1870s. She's actually the first person ever to have a design arts boutique. It was in Paris, and you could actually get design objects for the home. So by the time she is in her 50s and she's designing a house for herself, and this is just her approach to design, her approach to life. If she didn't find what she wanted, she made it. So she was furnishing the house that she had designed for herself, and she was inspired by the canvas sling-back chairs on the decks of the transatlantic ships. And that's, of course, where Transat, the name, comes from. And it's a fabulous example of the experimentation that was happening at the time, and particularly in her work with the hambering of the fabric so that it slings. She does it in leather, and it's much more durable than the canvas. She exposes the chrome hardware, very new product, post-war product. She does a couple of prototypes with different color. But mostly it's about the idea of prioritizing comfort over making a design statement. And I think that's what sets the chair, and that's what sets her as a designer apart. So, I think it aligns with the Design League's mission perfectly. Like all good design, it tells a story, and it's just unlike probably any chair that anyone's seen.
Right.
It's again evocative of those, of those canvas. I mean, IKEA sells those canvas deck chairs now, right? Or they used to anyway. We were just absolutely thrilled to be able to contribute that to the collection.
I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn. The public schools there, everyone, pretty much goes to the museum. In particular, the Museum of Natural History was real popular in the public schools back then. But it wasn't until I really got into college, and right after college, I went to an exhibition at the High Museum in Atlanta of Jacob Lawrence's Migration series. And that was, I think, the moment that I really made those emotional connections that we have with art. Because his whole series was about this migration of African Americans from the South to the North to find opportunity. And my parents were a part of that. So they actually migrated from South Carolina to Brooklyn, New York. My name is Therese Griffin, and I'm most involved at the Columbia Museum of Art as a volunteer on the board of directors for the Friends of African American Art and Culture.
It's such a pleasure to have you here, Therese.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for all the work you do. I know that, anytime you put the word volunteer in front of something, that means you work your tail off on long hours and no pay.
Yep, you've got it.
It's all by love, right?
It's all about the love, yes.
Sure. Well, could you tell us a little bit about what exactly Friends of African American Arts and Culture is?
So, as we call it, FAAC, the Friends of African American Art and Culture, we're one of the 3 affinity groups here at the museum. And our mission is all about bringing diverse perspectives into the museum. And whether that is in the art that you see here, the programming that you see here, or the people that you see here when you show up. We're actually celebrating 10 years this year. So we were established in the summer of 2010, and I got involved around the fall of 2010. So it's been a long time.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Y'all have several events that y'all do.
Yeah, so we are actively engaged year-round in coming up with ideas for programming. And the whole idea is to raise awareness for African American art and culture, to highlight local artists like we're doing now with the 22 South Carolinians exhibition that we're so proud of here at the museum, and just, bringing in more perspective. So one of the programs that we are now doing annually, we call Sip and Scribble. And during Sip and Scribble, there's wine, of course, but there's also, we have images of artists that we've gotten to know or that we admire. And folks come in from the community and they color. Often the artists show up and we're able to have conversations with them. And so you're learning about local artists and their perspectives and their inspirations and where they come from.
Thank you so much for doing that. I mean, I think that that's the other troubling part of the spectrum. Sometimes we think about art, we always think of it on a national level and even on the global level, and we forget so much is happening at the local level.
Exactly. And we want to bring that out, not just visual artists. So we want to bring out all kinds of artists, performing arts, poetry. We have storytellers last month for Martin Luther King Day.
What is this? A thumb. You're so correct. This is a thumb. Smart group. But guess what? Because we're all storytellers here, this is also a little boy. He's got a funny looking little boy, but he's still a little boy. And this little boy, we shall call him Langston. Everybody say, hey, Langston.
But probably one of the most inspiring things that we have done as an organization, I'm so proud that we have been able to do it in our 10th year, because it's like a big celebration all year long, is the 22 South Carolinians exhibition. that for me was almost like a pinnacle moment when I walked in, and there were people of all backgrounds. Young, old, there were grandmas, there were children, uncles and aunts, and people who had never been to the museum. And so I thought, wow, this is what we've been working for.
Yes.
This moment. It was awesome.
Well, I can say as you know, take this role that I'm in now and push it aside just as a patron, how pleased I am to see that, because I think so much of what shapes the narrative of us comes from our art. The variety of visual representation in there, from mixed media and photography to sculpture, there's so much, and yet there's a oneness to it.
Yeah, that's a really good way to think about it, because I do think art brings communities together in a way that you sense that oneness, even as I'm walking around the galleries and watching people, especially during the opening of 30 Americans and 22 South Carolinians. I ran into people from the region, from North Carolina and beyond, and, they were blown away. So I'm like, well, we're onto something here. And it's our hope and our intention from an FAAA perspective that we keep this going.
Yeah, I hope you keep it going. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I want to talk about one of the things that the FAAC has helped acquire, and that is Monotype 4. Could you tell us a little bit about who Oliver Lee Jackson is?
So Oliver Lee Jackson is a name that came to us as a board through Dolores Logan. Dolores Logan was an arts enthusiast extraordinaire, a community leader, a businesswoman, and she's just a wonderful person. She passed away in 2020, and although acquisition is something that we are very interested in at FAAC, and we aspire to be engaged in those conversations with the museum, it's not really a part of our mission. So our mission is more about bringing people in, bringing perspectives in. But because of Dolores and all that she brought to the museum and to FAAC and the community, we wanted to do something to remember her. We got together as a board and decided that we wanted to acquire a piece of art in her name. And she had brought Oliver Lee Jackson to us and members of the museum staff here as well, because in her travels and, migrating from South Carolina to California, where she lived for a period of time, she got to know him as an artist. So we started doing a little bit of research on him, and we were actually able to acquire one of his pieces. And the whole experience was great because we got to look at all these pieces from his collection and select one that we think would be most representative of Dolores and her memory. So that was a really special experience for us as a board. And in fact, this is sort of a preview because we haven't yet announced publicly the acquisition, and it has not yet been on display. And I don't want to describe the piece too much because we want this big unveiling. But he has shown nationally, internationally at major museums throughout the United States. And we were very fortunate to get one of his pieces. So you're going to have us come back once we unveil it.
Thanks to the Columbia Design League, the Contemporaries, the Friends of African American Arts and Culture, and all their representatives for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about any of these groups or general museum membership, check us out at columbiamuseum.org/join. Up next, I'm going to find out who's in charge around here.
I'm a seasoned treasure hunter. I have learned just the one you say no to is the one somebody else said yes to.
Mining for Gold with Della Watkins after this.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here to fill up your social calendar for September with some exciting CMA programming. On September 8th and the 14th, take a tour and get a new perspective on Amanda McCover's Bright Little Day Stars with volunteer coordinator and installation assistant Jackie Palmieri. On September 22nd, grab a cocktail and a seat for a panel discussion featuring Carol Suvion, executive producer and director of the Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated PBS series, Craft in America. On September 25th, get your dancing shoes ready for Shea Alexander Presents Live on Boyd Plaza with popular Charlotte-based outfit Reggie Graves and Jazz Theory. You can find out more about these and all of our upcoming programs and events on our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
This is a past museum. A lady called and said, my husband has passed away, and he has told me his whole life that he wanted our local museum to have his collection. So she invited me over, and I went in the front door, and first we had to have tea, and we had to talk about who I was and, who I belonged to and all about me. We warmed up, and she said, well, the collection is in the basement. I'd like to show you. So I go down to the basement, and truly there were hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of stamps. All duck stamps. Hundreds of thousands of them. And I'm thinking, duck stamps, what am I going to say? So, so I talked to her about, let's find a museum that would take stamps, and I'll help you with that. And she goes, oh, honey, this is not the whole collection. So we go out to the shed, and it's, through a little breezeway, and we go out, and she opens up the shed doors, and there are hundreds of duck decoys. So we go through, and we keep talking, and I'm letting her down gently because that's not something my museum would take, but I'll find a home. So she takes me a different way through the house. As we go through the back door, all of a sudden I go into the dining room. And there is what looks like a faded, huge image. Something had been removed, and I stopped her and I said, I would not be a good museum director if I didn't tell you somebody's taken your painting. And she said, oh no, somebody came in and said I need to have that cleaned, so I'm having it cleaned. Well, lo and behold, it was a beautiful Walter Biggs, which was a regional attraction in the Virginia area. And after we had more of a relationship, we got that piece. I'm Della Watkins. I'm the executive director at the Columbia Museum of Art in beautiful Columbia, South Carolina.
And it is beautiful today, isn't it?
It is.
Of course, it's South Carolina, so if the weather is beautiful, just wait a minute. If it's bad, wait another minute.
I migrated south because it is warm. And
famously.
Famously warm. But my last destinations in Virginia were cold. And, I went to school in Virginia. It was snowy and had 4 beautiful seasons, but it was cold.
Yeah.
You look down at your panel of instruments on your car and it says 1 degree and you knock on it and say, is that working?
Right. And it just breaks. It's all ice.
Yeah.
Well, Della, it's great to have you here. I would imagine that being an executive director of anything means that, you have a lot to do, but certainly being executive director at a really cool art museum, I know could be a lot of bias in this room because I think it's the coolest art museum. I know you do.
I do.
How did Della Watkins become executive director of the Columbia Museum of Art?
Well, people ask that a lot, and I will tell you, it is a journey. Because I don't think I didn't wake up one morning and thought, you know what, I'm going to be a museum director.
Right.
Because, it wasn't a path that I was used to. I'm from a very small town in Virginia, Tappahannock, Virginia. I had a very little local museum, but, we had to travel 60 miles to go to a big museum. And so in my early years, I wasn't exposed to museums. But I remember when I was 17 years old and a senior in high school, the guidance counselor came to me and said, every county in Virginia has been asked to send 1 female and 1 male senior interested in art to Richmond, Virginia, which was the state capital, for a 3-day program. And I was selected. And I remember showing up at that big museum thinking, this is neat. It's beautiful things. It's interesting. It's different. So that became the first bite of me being interested. And then I went off to college and I wanted to do art. Well, I had my father sitting on my shoulder, that little voice that says, so what exactly are you going to do with art or art history as a career? So I found that one of my gifts was teaching. I like to do the research and I like to find out all about art, but then I was anxious to tell someone. So I was a classroom teacher for 13 years, an art teacher. And then one day a girlfriend called and said, your dream job is in the classifieds of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Go to page, whatever it was, 13, and look in the middle. So I did, and it was the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond was looking for a art educator with an art history background to bolster the art education program in the museum. And I mean, that's a long time. I think that's 30 years ago when, museums were places of objects.
Right.
And now I'm so excited because my talents and passion and gifts are really working into what museums have become today, which is a place for people that engage with art. And I argue with, curators way back when I was a young museum professional. And my argument was, you can put the most beautiful object up there, but if nobody comes to see it, you got nothing.
Right.
So let's attract audiences. And that is the whole shift today is audience-centered, learning and leisure and love.
Yeah. That's cool. That's such a good story, though.
Yeah. So it started out that way.
I mean, starting out from education. And I think we can all hear in your enthusiasm and passion in your voice about what you do.
How I got to Columbia was also passion. Because I was working in Roanoke, Virginia, and I had just finished construction project on the building, the Taubman Museum of Art. And I heard about the renovation beginning here in Columbia. And I thought, I know what that means. When you spend resources and local government buy-in and you have community buy-in to fund a renovation, that also means on the other end, when the renovation is done, you have that same buy-in of love and commitment for audiences in a finished product. So I was all interested in the construction project here, knowing on the other side, it becomes your community hub, your international museum, your beloved place. And so that was what attracted me here in particular, is this museum and this renovation project.
Let's talk a little bit about how you think about art. What sort of art draws you in?
Well, I always take the easy way out on this question, and I always answer it. I'm most interested in the newest piece that either goes in the gallery or the special exhibition that comes, because you better believe I've got a lot of studying to do every single time a new object pops up. Because of the researcher in me and that art historian, I'm really interested in that. When I go to museums all across the country, I always look for what they consider special first when I go in, like, what are your highlights? And I go and I'm thinking, that's your highlight? and it's all relative to that community. So I'm learning about relevance and trying to bring that back to Columbia, like what's important to us. And, looking at my collection, you see I own it.
Right.
You see me owning it?
I see you owning it.
We have about 7,000 works in the collection here at the Columbia Museum of Art. And we call them accessions works that we have taken into our collection and forever promised to take care of them. And in those, 700, people say, what's your best piece? Again, it's all an opinion, but I mean, we have 400 or 500 super duper stars. I mean, objects that my colleagues across the world want to borrow from us. Superstars. Right. For this reason or that reason. Maybe it's the first one or the only one or the early one, whatever that reason is. The other, 6,000 works are beautiful works that are meaningful in different ways to a collection. So, that's something that, I can talk to you all day about is what do we have here in the museum?
Which is an amazing trove, honestly. I mean, what patrons see on the outside, what's on the walls, what's on the pedestals, is really a drop in the bucket.
It's a drop in the bucket. And, people yell at me all the time for that.
Yeah.
They're like, you got so much stuff. Why don't you show some more stuff? But even though we have, 24 galleries, it takes a lot of real estate, spacing it out. So yeah, I'm here to tell you, and I'll admit out loud, that only less than 10% of our collection is on view at any one time.
Wow.
And, it's a lot in storage, but that also gives us the ability to rotate things that are fragile or me to loan things to other communities, or me to take things off you and conserve them or repair them. So a permanent collection, in my opinion, is critical for a regional museum like ours. So we only have about 4 collecting areas. We collect European art, Asian art, contemporary and modern, and American art. We have a collecting strategy to sort of make it the best that it can be in those areas. So, if somebody calls up and says, I have a this or I have a that, sometimes I have to say no. And, how things come into the collection is fascinating because it's many, many different ways. But our collecting areas, we stick to those 4 big buckets.
What are some of, more recent acquisitions that have happened specifically since you've been here in 4 years? I mean, you've been here for about 4 years. Yeah.
And, it's about, my job is about relationships. It's about raising friends that support the museum in their attendance and their gifts. It's about partners that come to us for programming. It is about fundraising. But this relationship part is key because collectors that are in our region or state or wherever they come from really have to believe with confidence that if they were to gift a work to the Columbia Museum of Art, it'd be taken care of, it'd be shown, it'd be loved, it would be just a treasure to us. So, I get calls all the time. People say, we're cleaning out the attic and we found well, the first thing is I get a jolt because in my heart, I'm like, cleaning out the attic means it was exposed to hot and cold. Right. And hot, cold, which probably the paint's peeled off by now. But I always take those calls. If they invite me to their home or their warehouse or their office, I go. Because when I go, it first of all establishes a new friend to the museum and a friend to me. And when I show up, oh my goodness, it has been every surprise you can imagine. But recently, here in Columbia, a couple, they said, come on over, we want to show you what we have. And as we're thinking about our legacy giving, we want to sort of see if you're interested in any of our things. Well, I went into a home and I saw probably 4,000 pieces of art. Now, they were little. Sure. Some were jewelry pieces and some were clay pieces and some were paintings. But, what I have to work with collectors to understand is I can't take 4,000 works.
Right.
Yes, my desire would be to look at all that they have and then select out of there things that enhance the museum's collection. And maybe I want to cherry pick out of there 12 things. Well, that devastates a collector. Right. That I want to swoop in and I want to get, 10 or 20 pieces. But, I have to sit down and help collectors and people that want to give things to the museum to understand it's about resources. Once I take it in, I have to physically put it somewhere for storage. I have to have staff and expertise to manage it. And I have to have money to take care of forever.
Right.
So this collector who has just become wonderful friends of the museum, we're looking at that collection and we are thinking, would you let me first have 20 things that would enhance the collection and tell stories in what I have? And over the years, as you continue your legacy planning, there are other things that may come, a new curator might want, or we might find a reason. So it's a relationship. It's a long, trusting relationship.
Della Watkins is the executive director at the Columbia Museum of Art. The best way to catch Della is by coming into the museum, so come on by and say hello. You can find out more about upcoming CMA exhibitions and programs on our website. You know the URL, columbiamuseum.org. I've never really personally purchased a piece of art, primarily because I never really had the money to do so. But I have been given pieces of art, and specifically books of poetry, that are by far the most special to me. Whether it was a gift from a friend who said, hey, I saw this book and it made me think of you and I think you would enjoy it, or you need this book because, it might help you. When you are giving art to someone else, you're spreading a legacy to that person from your hand to their hand, whether it was something that someone wrote or someone painted or sculpted. You're giving it to them so that they and their families can enjoy. And the story of the art and the story of the giving of that art become almost inseparable. You've been listening to Binder, a production of Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about Binder, CMA exhibitions, and programs, please visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.